My name is Alan Bandy. I teach at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, and I've been there for about 5 years. Prior to that, I was in Oklahoma at another university, and my area has always been the book of Revelation. I've studied it for about 25 years, and it wasn't until probably 2011 that I came to Turkey for the first time with Tukku, and instantly was riveted and fell in love. And I have been coming ever since, bringing groups, planned several more trips for ongoing years. And there's something that about visiting these sites that lodges deep in your soul, because this land not just gives us the history and the culture, but it connects us to the real world congregations that John is writing to. And Revelation is, it's an interesting book to study, right? It's one that has a wide range of competing interpretations and different perspectives. But one kind of core conviction that I have toward interpreting Scripture, especially Revelation, is it had to mean something to the people it was written to. And so when we look at the messages to the 7 churches, I do want to encourage you, move beyond chapter 3. Because the rest of the book also has connections to the locale, to the images, to the symbols. It's a message. As Dana so well put, it's presenting or unmasking the counterfeit system of Rome and the idolatrous cults that were ubiquitous. They were everywhere. A number of years ago, I wrote this book, largely kind of born out of my trips here. It's published with Baker. It's an illustrated guide to the Apostle Paul. I wish I had more to sell, but this is my only copy, and I'm going to give it to Meltem. But you can get it on Amazon if that's available to you. It's not very expensive. It's filled with pictures and maps and just trying to flesh out the world of Paul's journeys. My next book with Baker, which is due next summer, is kind of a counterpart to this, and it's an illustrated guide to the 7 cities of Revelation, in which we're kind of take them on a tour of the cities, but also connect it to interpreting throughout the whole book of Revelation. So be looking for that. If you see me running around with a camera, that's why I'm taking pictures. So I was given Pergamum, and I couldn't be more thrilled. It's one of my favorite of the cities to visit. It's also one of my favorite of the messages to the 7 churches. Why does it matter? Well, a number of reasons, right? In ancient history, it was a significant city. It has, I think, one of the most impressive acropolis you could ever go visit. And most importantly for us, it was home to an early Christian community. I would imagine that going back to Acts chapter 19, it was largely probably born out of the ministry of Paul in Ephesus for those 3 years. Regardless, when John is writing to the churches, we see Christianity spread throughout Asia Minor to a point where they've been there for a while. If we were to just kind of look at the location and placement and arrangement of Pergamum, modern day Bergama, right? And the meaning of Pergamum is citadel. It's about 70 miles from Izmir. If you're using kilometers, 113. And the Acropolis sits upon Calais Hill, and it's just this beautiful, imposing little jut up of a mountain there. And it's dominated by a surrounding plain of the Berkshire plain around it. There's 2 rivers flanking it, the Salinas and the Syrtis, one on each side. And the urban plan is really beautiful because it kind of going from the top down to the bottom, you have terraces, you have steps, you have monumental structure, And all of it kind of conveys this very imposing, very dominant city. So I want to do a brief history, and I kind of chuckled to myself as I was creating this, because what do I mean by brief? It's easy to dig deep and really kind of explore all that there is, but the reason why I think history matters is a couple things. One, we're all products of our history. History is around us all the time. Those who don't study it and learn it are doomed to repeat some of the most grievous mistakes. But also, we are a product of our culture, and our culture is formed somewhat by the history that we're a part of. And so Pliny the Elder said of Pergamum, it is by far the most famous city of Asia. And I'm really going to narrow down its history, even though there's much earlier settlements that can be traced there, to the Hellenistic time, most notably of the Attalids, and into the Roman period, just to set the stage for our look at the message to Pergamum. I decided to include a list of some ancient writers that all mention Pergamum and where you can find the sources there, and also the dates, so you can get a sense of when they were written, as well as kind of some of the big things that they say about it and how that helps us understand some things. But looking at the Hellenistic period, right, the earliest archaeological evidence has a settlement dating back to the 8th century BC. And we know this from imported pottery from Eastern Greece and Corinth. The first written reference to Pergamum is from Xenophon and his Anabasis, in which he, kind of going to war against the Persians, marches his army of 10,000 and ends at Pergamum. The name Pergamum also appears in ancient coinage from the 5th century BC, and it also provides that non-literary evidence of the city's existence and name. So here I have 2 coins. We New Testament scholars love coins. Nothing overly significant about either of these coins or their images other than the dating. So this one is during the time of the Persian period. So we have a satrap, which would be equivalent to a governor, dating to 450 to 350 BC. And then another early one with the head of Hercules, dating, you see the dates there. Now, looking at the Hellenistic period, and by Hellenistic we mean that period about the time or just after Alexander the Great, who, as he's going to war against the Persians, he is spreading Greek culture everywhere he goes, all the way to India, establishing cities and bringing with him after the army a whole troop of poets, philosophers, musicians, artisans, to kind of say Greek culture is the best in the world and everybody should be subject to it, right? And most notably, the language. So Strabo, in his geography, says Pergamum has a kind of supremacy among these places. It is a city of note and flourished during the long period under the Attalid kings, and here we shall begin our description, premising a short account of her kings and their origin and the end of their career. So that's kind of what my goal is with this. So ultimately, the region that we would know of as where Pergamum is fell under the control of Lysimachus, right? So he was one of Alexander the Great's generals, and he was given or took possession of the area around Thrace, which would be just outside of Istanbul, kind of past the Turkish border there. So around 301 BC, Lysimachus made Pergamum his treasury, and of about 9,000 talents, which would be equivalent by today's money, 4 billion US dollars. And so he entrusted his treasury in Pergamum, because it's, you know, if you see it, you'll understand. It's a bastion of a city. to Philastrus of Tiana as the steward and kind of caretaker of his treasure. Now, what happened is, right, in 282, Seleucus, right, another one of Alexander the Great's general, who found it, was in that area of Antioch and Seleucia Perea, right, he had control of Syria, and he begins to kind of push into Lysimachus's territory, right? Well, Philastrus had kind of a falling out with one of Lysimachus's third wife, Erisino, and so he kind of decided, I'm going to side with Seleucus here in this battle. So he kind of broke with Lysimachus and kind of became under control of the Seleucid period until Seleucus died. So he summarizes Philastrus this way. He says, his political maneuvering during these disorders, the eunuch, and he was a eunuch, means he had no children, and that's going to be important in a minute, remained in the fortress continually, employing the policy of promises and other courtesies with those who were the strongest and nearest to himself. He thus continued master of the stronghold for 20 years. So he is credited with establishing Pergamum as a powerful independent kingdom, which was later known as the Attalid dynasty. Now, since Philastrus was a eunuch, he adopted his brother's son. Now, his brother's name was Eumenes, so he adopted his son, Eumenes, and named him as his successor. So in 263, Eumenes I became the ruler of Pergamum and continued to expand and build up the city and its territory, which provoked Antiochus, Seleucus' son, to declare war against him. But Eumenes defeated him at the Battle of Sardis in 261 BC. So, Eumenes also adopted another of his nephews, Attalus I. And so in 241, Attalus I succeeds Eumenes I as the ruler of Pergamum. In 238 BC, Attalus defeated the Gauls, which were in the Galatian area, North Galatia, we would refer to it. And he establishes it as an independent kingdom. And because of his defeat of the Gauls, who were their biggest threat, he is called Soter, or Savior, and proclaimed king. And so the name Attalid, the Attalid dynasty, comes from Attalus I. Because of his defeat of the Gauls, he built the Temple of Athena, Nike, to commemorate that victory. And so by the time of 226, he controls the entire kind of region of Asia from the Taurus Mountains west. Make sure I get that right. And he allied with Rome in 212 BC, which ultimately, kind of by the end, after a while, by the Treaty of Apamea, secures that territory to the Attalids. Now, his son, Eumenes II, Soter. Now, the reason why I do all this is, one, there's a lot of Eumenes and Attaluses. And so when you're going through the history, it's kind of nice to sort them out and understand who did what and where they fit, because they all kind of shared the same name. So Eumenes II, I think, is probably one of the most significant kings of Pergamum, starting in 197. It reached its peak of its political and cultural power under Eumenes II. His reign is marked by numerous victories and wars, all with the help of Rome. However, as time goes on, there's some tensions developing between the Pergamum kingdom and Rome, and the Romans begin to distrust Eumenes. But one of the things I want to point out, because when we go there, I opted not to go overboard with lots of pictures of Pergamum, because you're going to see it, and you're going to get a lot of the explanation while you're there. But some of the things that he's credited under his time was he built the library, with the 200,000 scrolls. Unfortunately, Mark Antony had something to do with that and the removal. But he is also credited with, under his reign, the development of parchment, which was a much improved writing material over papyrus, which is a plant, or vellum, which is a leather. It's a specially treated type of a young goat leather that was much more durable. He constructed the great altar of Zeus and the Acropolis Theater. Moving along. Attalus II, Philadelphus. So he was the brother and right-hand man of Eumenes II. And he frequently served as a general, as an effective leader, alongside his brother in many of their wars. He was also the Pergamum ambassador to the city of Rome. Now, on one occasion, and I give lots of details here, but essentially, on one occasion, when the Romans were fighting a Greek named Perseus, and they defeated him, Attalus II goes there to congratulate him, but they believed that Eumenes, his brother, conspired with Perseus to overthrow the Romans. And so they're like, we don't trust him. And they tried to convince Attalus II to basically off his own brother and become king of Pergamum. And he kind of entertained it, but one of his counselors from Pergamum said, no, you don't want to do that. And so ultimately he refused. He remained loyal to his brother as a result. So Eumenes, part of the loyalty of Attalus II, founded Philadelphia, right? Which means the one who loves his brother, in honor of Attalus. Now, upon Eumenes' death, Attalus II becomes king, but he's actually a co-regent with Eumenes' son, Attalus III, who was just too young to be king. So Attalus II is really, I find him a fascinating person, just devoted to his brother and to the welfare of the kingdom. So Attalus III, Philometor, was adopted by his father's stepmother, and therefore it was given the name, the one who loves his mother. He comes to full power in 138 BC, but he had a very short reign, if you notice, from 138 to 133. He's known for writing many books on plants and horticulture and agriculture, and there's a rumor that he poisoned his wife and his mother. He liked to play with plants. But upon his death, and he had no heir, he willed the city of Pergamum to Rome. And that's why Rome, it became part of the Roman province. Lots of possible reasons why this. He had no heir. It was not uncommon for a king to bequeath the kingdom to Rome. It may have been to show his loyalty to Rome, because the falling out with his father in Rome still left things shaky, so maybe he's trying to secure that. And then one thing I read was that Rome was possibly planning to annex Pergamum and take it over anyway, so he just gave it to him. We don't know, but that's how it became Roman. Now, moving along as quick as I can, because I know you're getting hungry. Basically, under the Romans, it continues to grow. So much so I can't talk about it in depth, right? It was the capital of Asia Minor until that was supplanted by Ephesus, which became a much bigger and much more important city. Under the Roman period, it swelled to a population of about 200,000. And it was the administrative, political, and judicial center for the region. It was where they made sure all the legal affairs for the entire province were the taxes collected and so forth. It attracted merchants, scholars, artisans. Its infrastructure continued to be expanded with new buildings, roads, aqueducts, administrative functions, and a growing population. And the Romans also established new city areas west of the Salinas and completed all the necessary things for infrastructure there. One of the most important features of Pergamum was it was the first city to ever host an imperial cult temple, right? So in 29 BC, the temple to Augustus, Octavian Augustus, the emperor, and Roma was built. This is a huge, huge honor for the city. In fact, the bragging rights, you can read inscriptions there of twice Neocorus or twice Neocorus, the temple guardian. These are huge bragging rights. You see all these cities bragged over being able to host an imperial cult temple. This was the first one. We don't know where it is, right? So the one that you will see was later built during the time of Emperor Trajan. And it, like I said, we don't know where the earliest imperial cult temple might have been located, but we can see this coin from that period that shows the temple in the background. Also, the Asclepion, which had been there for a long period of time as a healing center to the god Asclepius, the god of healing, became much more prominent under the most famous doctor of the day, Galen, who lived and practiced there in the 2nd century, wrote many books that doctors still refer to today. So as we can see here, just kind of an overview, there's modern Bergama, kind of built on top of some of the old structures and ruins, and then you have the remains there. We will not be able to go tour up and down the mountain. We'll go up to the Acropolis and see some other things. But I want to turn our attention in our last little bit of time, because the message to the Church of Pergamum is very important. So if you've already picked it up already in our discussions and in our talks, what we're doing is we're saying, when you read these messages, there are, you know, I really liked, Jeff, I really liked the 2 ears, right? There are Old Testament language, image, theology that's on every page and every chapter throughout the book of Revelation. And to understand some of the meaning, you have to understand the context of how it fits within the scriptures of Israel. But also you have to have that ear to the ancient culture and the world, because it was a message to a living congregation. The other thing I'd like to kind of highlight here is, in past generations, people would say Revelation was all about the church was being violently persecuted, and that's all that they were facing. Y'all, the reality is, in the persecution they were facing, and sometimes the worst form of persecution, is that social pressure, right? Whether you're not participating in the trade guild, so your shop is being boycotted, you can't work, how do you feed your family? Those types of issues are real. The reason you would abstain from them is because every trade guild had a patron god or goddess. And part of the meetings involved sacrifices to those gods, as well as other activities. Most paganism, most idolatry is very common to involve sexual immorality as well. It was just part of the air in the world that they were living in. And so as a Christian who wants to be loyal and faithful to Christ, well, you're a minority. And it's just even that social pressure, your family, the people around you, will just see you as weird, but they see you as dangerous. Especially if you're seen as a threat by not paying homage to the divine emperor. Are you seditious? Are you a troublemaker? Right? So they were facing all kinds of pressure. We also saw the internal problems that they were facing of complacency and compromise. So the reason I point that out is because there's very little evidence to suggest that there was a full kind of widespread, empire-wide persecution at the time of the writing of Revelation. But rather, it was localized in various settings, and I think in John's vision, he's anticipating an intensification of these things. And stealing, strengthening his audience. Remain faithful to Christ, no matter what. If they kill you, they imprison you, he will vindicate you at his great coming. Now, the reason I point that out is because if there was any city where problems had escalated to the point of execution, martyrdom, it was Pergamum. So here's the message. I'm going to read it, but notice the highlighted parts. Rather than going through every little detail, I'm just going to kind of pull out some of the phrases and images and help kind of flesh those out a little bit for us. But write to the angel of the church of Pergamum, thus says the one who has the sharp double-edged sword. I know where you live, where Satan's throne is. Yet you are holding on to my name, and you did not deny your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death among you, where Satan lives. But I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teachings of Balaam, who taught Balak to place a stumbling block in front of the Israelites to eat meat sacrificed to idols and to commit sexual immorality. In the same way, you also have those who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans, just like in Ephesus, the reference there. So repent, otherwise I will come quickly to you and fight against them with the sword of my mouth. Okay? Let anyone who has ears hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. To the one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give him a white stone, and on the stone a new name inscribed that no one knows except the one who receives it. So I'm going to look at those areas that are bolded there. And the first thing is in that description of Christ, drawn from that opening vision in chapter 1, where he sees the Rhomphaia, which, as Jeff pointed out, is a longer, large sword, sharp, double-edged. This is a gladius. It's not the same, but it's the same kind of the sharp, double-edged sword. And so what I want to point out here is in the book of Revelation, it is the only weapon that Christ wields. And if you have this countercultural, kind of counter-imperial language here, what you need to understand is, while the Romans conquered the world at the tip of a sword, Christ doesn't come in the same bloody, violent kind of way. All he needs is the sword of his mouth, which is a symbolic way of representing his word. And so he tells them, right, repent, I will come against you and fight with the sword in my mouth. Y'all, I think taking the lampstand away from the Ephesians is pretty harsh. Y'all, some of our churches will be corrected and chastened by the powerful living word of God. And while it brings comfort, it can also bring woe and repentance. But we also see that this is the weapon that's brandished in the final battle. It's mentioned in 19 when he's riding on the horse, when he returns, with which he will strike the nations. And then and later in chapter 19, the battle, the armies that gather to him, they all fall, they're all slain just by the word that he spoke. But there's a dual kind of idea here. It's not just his word, his spoken word, but I think the sword is representative of what's known as the jus gladii. So in the Roman Empire, the only person who had the right of capital punishment, who could give a guilty verdict to death, was the Roman emperor. And the symbol of that right of capital punishment was the jus gladii, the sword of justice. And he would delegate that authority to his governors in the various provinces, so they could also give a death sentence. Now, the reason I point that out is a couple fold. For example, Jeff, in your picture of the Titus statue, right, the giant head and the arm.
Or Domitian, either one.
Yeah, we'll say Domitian. There's debate there. Is it Titus or is it Domitian? Two brothers. Anyways, it's huge. But in his hand, it's like this. He's holding something, isn't he? It was a sword. And I've taken numerous pictures of other statues of governors of the region, and they all have swords. Sometimes they're holding them like this, and they're kind of like in the scabbard. But the sword was the symbol of justice and the ability to sentence someone to death. Now, the reason I point that out is because in Pergamum, in its recent history, there was a man named Antipas. And while we think of persecution as almost mob riot, like people just get angry and kill people, the Romans were a system of justice. People don't just kill people they don't like. That's why they took Jesus to Pontius Pilate. They need official, legal authority to kill somebody. So Antipas, whatever the situation was, Antipas, who was a faithful believer, probably in the context of a trial, received an unjust verdict. Y'all follow me on this? Why is Jesus depicted as the one with the sword? Because just like with death and Hades, he has power over life and death, not the emperor. It's a reminder to the believers that even if judges in this world give us unfavorable, unjust verdicts that may result even in our death, that there is a supreme judge, a supreme king who will render just and right verdicts and hold those accountable who judged you. Essentially, that's what I said. One note about Antipas. Antipas wasn't a completely unknown name in the first century. You find it in a number of places. What is interesting is it is the name most associated with the Herod family. So Bruce Longnecker wrote a little fictional book. It's really a good read called The Lost Letters of Pergamum. And then he suggests that Antipas was a relative of the Herod family, may have been somebody of nobility. I don't know, right? It's just a suggestion. It's a whisper. But I will say this. Whoever he was well known enough that all he has to do is say Antipas, and everybody knew who they were talking about. And in the book of Revelation, he's the only one at this point who's been killed in the 7 cities, at least mentioned by name. So it would have been a traumatizing event for that community. Now, the other mention there is where Satan lives and where Satan has his throne. It's mentioned twice, at the beginning and at the end there. Now, Satan is identified in Revelation in 12:9 as the great dragon, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, and the one who deceives the whole world. So he is seen as this monstrous red dragon with multiple heads who is terrorizing the people of God, the woman and her offspring, trying to kill them, and God's protecting her and so forth. But he is the one who is kind of pulling the strings in the world, right? And deceiving them. But also, he is called in 12:10 the accuser of the brethren. And what I want to point out about that is accuser is a legal term, prosecuting attorney. And likely John is drawing from the vision in Zechariah where Satan is condemning Joshua, the high priest, at the time of the rebuilding of the temple, kind of after the Babylonian exile, in which Joshua is wearing dirty clothes. And Satan is saying, look, he's guilty. How can he be yours? How can he do good? God says basically leave him alone and cleanses his garments. What is Satan doing? He is the one, in a very literal sense, bringing legal accusation against believers who are marginalized and don't have laws to favor them or protect them. But also in a spiritual sense, he's the one that accuses us before the Father. How can you call that person one of your children? But Jesus is our great advocate. Now I want to draw on Hebrews. I'm with Dana. I like to be at the end of the New Testament. He is our great high priest who argues for our defense. But anyway, the reference to the throne of Satan and where Satan lives basically can be boiled down into two categories. Literal reference as something like one of the buildings or structures of Pergamum, or a metaphorical reference describing something about the city, but not in a literalistic, like it's that building. So here are some of the most popular suggestions. The altar of Zeus, Zeus being the king of the gods. This was a commanding altar. There you can see the outline of it. If you want to see it, you have to go to Germany. But there it sat on top of the hill overlooking the city, and some people say, well, that was Satan's throne. Another suggestion is the imperial cult, which was such a dominant force, and we see that the beast is in league with the imperial cult. The beast is likely kind of depicted as an emperor-like figure. And so some people say, see, that's the throne of Satan, where the emperor is worshipped. And then others will point to things like the Asclepion. I don't know it. Are we doing it? No, we're not. So it's this massive complex, very famous healing complex. They have sleeping chambers where the god Asclepius will come to you and bring your healing. It's dominated by water features. But one of the main symbols associated with it are serpents, partly because of the mythology related to Asclepius and healing. So some people say, see, it's a serpent, and Satan is a serpent, so it must be the Asclepius cult. However, I'd like to draw your attention back to the text and just say, let's look at the context here. Notice in verse 13, at the very beginning, where Satan's throne is, and then at the very end, where Satan lives, all in connection to the death of Antipas. Right? So, I think it's important to connect whatever the throne of Satan refers to, it's directly related to the death of Antipas. So I think what it's depicting is more metaphorical to say, Satan has such control over that city, it's resulted in the death of one of my faithful ones. More like to say Satan is directly pulling the strings behind things in Pergamum. So I see it much more, not necessarily any one of the buildings, but we have a number of people here who study this for a living, and somebody will probably disagree. It's fine. It's one of those things we can whisper, but I think it makes the most sense within the text. Okay. Moving along, believe it or not, I am almost done, because I can hear your stomachs growling. It also mentions those who follow the teachings of Balaam. Just very quickly, Numbers 25 and 31 describe when Balaam, who was the prophet hired by the Moabite king to curse the people of Israel, and didn't, as he went, he starts beating his donkey because there's an angel about to kill him. You all know the story, right? And then he goes up, and every time he tries to open his mouth, blessings come out. And then at the end, according to tradition as well as within the text itself, it indicates that Balaam's like, look, we can't curse them, but we can lead them astray. And so he builds an altar to Baal Peor and kind of entices the people of Israel to engage in idolatry and sexual immorality. And so I think what John is doing, whether you call it a nickname or a code name, he's taking this name Balaam from the Old Testament tradition to levy it at a false teacher in Pergamum who's leading people astray particularly into the area of meat sacrificed to idols and sexual immorality. So, meat sacrificed to idols is this. When you worship at one of these gods, at any of their temples, even in the associational gatherings, you sacrifice an animal, you roast it, there's meat, and you eat that meat. From a pagan context, that eating the meat is in part of celebration and worship of that deity. Christians were faced with this in Corinth and elsewhere. This was a tough issue, especially if they're coming out of that lifestyle where it meant something to them. Also, sexual immorality. I tend to think that sexual immorality, yes, is literal sexual immorality, but also spiritual sexual immorality of like spiritual adultery, of not being faithful to their Lord, compromising with the gods and goddesses and the emperor of the day. So whoever this Balaam is and whatever he's teaching, he's basically suggesting that you can participate in your surrounding culture. You can worship at the temples. You can practice like everybody else. And be a follower of Jesus. And this is particularly problematic and associated with the Nicolaitans. Last thing I want to point out is the promise to the end. He gives a white stone. Pergamum is famous for its onyx mines that are throughout the whole region. And in Rome, onyx was highly prized for its durability and its beauty because there's often layers of colors within them. So Roman artisans, and here we have two ancient artifacts from the Roman period carved out of onyx. Y'all, that stuff's beautiful, right? So what we see is this reference to the white stone, because the hidden manna, we can go back to the Old Testament and see, God providing, but the white stone doesn't have a particular Old Testament reference. So here I think it's that cultural ear we're listening to. So I will give to them a white stone with a new name inscribed on it that no one knows. So I have a habit of every time I go to Pergamum, I stop at the onyx shop and buy, usually I can only find an egg, but a white egg from white onyx. It's just meaningful to me. And here we have an onyx with a name on it, and kind of like a pendant. So the range of possibilities of the white stone, listen, everything has been suggested. All of them are good. Everything from priestly imagery related to the priestly breastplate with the stones in it, admission tokens to athletic events or banquets. But I tend to think, because my area has focused on judicial procedures in the ancient world, I think that the white stone is a reference to judicial verdicts. To quote Craig Kester in his Anchor Bible commentary on Revelation, masterful, it's more recent, he says this: placing a small stone into an urn was a way in which voting was done in antiquity. A white stone was positive, a black stone was negative. A white stone is essentially, they have conquered. They are vindicated. Now, in the final moment, let me just turn it personally. Before coming to Christ, I was a pagan. And I don't mean just an unbeliever. I practice paganism. I was involved in Wicca, occult practices. I drank another human's blood at one point. I was a punk rocker. I had a mohawk. Safety pin in my ear. I was a self-declared agnostic or atheist. I was a drug addict, and constantly in problems. My name, in fact, I had a kid in school once say to me, "Hey, if you ever come over to my house, your name is Kevin, because my mom hates Alan." I had that reputation. I have more regrets than I ever wanted to have. of things that I've done, most of which is none of your business. My name has been soiled and ruined by my sin. And although I'm redeemed, I look forward to receiving that white stone with a new name, only associated with righteousness, that he will give me when he vindicates me on the day of his coming. Thank you.